Hello, yes, hi, and welcome to the Dark Knight Conspiracies, episode 88, Red Dawn in Ukraine. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Boy, they're painting a picture out there, aren't they? This is absurd. Oh, Russia's going in. Putin's a dictator. He's going in. He's killing innocent civilians. Well, last time I checked, the reported death count's like 189, 190, of a country of 3 million. So I seriously doubt Putin is targeting civilians, but I digress. And I just want to point out something before we get started. Make no mistake, I am not sticking up for these individuals. They are dictators. They're ruthless. As with many dictators in our time. Khomeini, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. I'll just say one thing about Putin, Xi. I'll just say one thing about these people before the U.S. got involved in a lot of these countries. Whether they be dictators or not, I'm not condoning their deeds. I'm not condoning their actions. They're bad people. But they kept peace in their lands until we got involved. And again, regime change. How many times have we heard regime change over the last 30 years? Again, if you don't think things were fixed in this country, you better believe things were fixed in other countries in terms of who got put in power. And again, just do your research on all that. Why did the whole Libya thing with Gaddafi and Hussein, they all had one thing in common. They didn't have a central bank. And this was laid out very clearly back in the day. Of all the countries, I think there were only like 5 or 6 of them, and yet this is where all these wars started. You getting the picture here? So, here's my take on what's really going on. Again, as I said, I'm not condoning, but for all the people out there that want to call Putin a butcher and tortured people and this and that, you need to look in your own backyard before you start throwing stones. If you think this country has been innocent over these last 50 years of what we've been doing to other countries, you're fooling yourselves. But I digress again. So before I get started into the whole Ukraine, I just want to start with this one. So after the dictator Castro Trudeau invokes emergency powers, which was voted on by the Canadian Parliament, these people aren't hiding their true colors. Basically, this was an announcement of, look at me, I'm a dictator. Yet, you find it interesting that none of the NATO leaders, Brandon, none of these people condemned these actions. Interesting, isn't it? But yet, Putin's a merciless dictator. He stands against democracy. See the hypocrisy here? Just saying. So, right after this all gets voted, all of a sudden Trudeau comes out and revokes it after it was voted on. What happened in 48 hours? Well, I'll tell you what happened. One, I think the events going on right now had something to do with it. And number two, the whole CV-19 narrative is breaking down. And shortly, I think it's just going to be non-existent. So what are you basing your Emergency Powers Act on when the event is not there to base it on? And Brandon did the same thing. He extended the Emergency Powers Act in, the U.S. under the guise of all this stuff, and nobody's paying attention. So, before I break into this, I just want to paint a scenario. We know through history, Russia and China have been our enemies. Our history dictates that. But what happens, everybody wants, Russia wants world domination. China wants world domination. We pretend we don't want world domination, but we know that's, fake too. The deep state has their own agenda, and they want us all submissive and controlled. But when you constantly have these, proxy wars going on throughout the last 30 years with these countries, India has been fighting China constantly over the years. These little wars have been going on forever. What happens if, say, everybody is threatened by a common enemy? What happens? Logically, you put aside your differences and you form alliances to fight the threat that affects everybody. So I just caution people to just sit back, watch this play out, and let's see what happens before we start condemning and throwing people or throwing rocks at people and, asking for military intervention and all. Just, take a step back. Again, when you got a common threat, look, a perfect example. It's no secret. Russia and China do not get along, but yet they're working together right now. So my premise of this whole thing, and I'm going to try and lay this out, I think there is a global alliance with many, many countries behind the scenes that are taking on this enemy. But it's not going to get reported that way. The optics are very important, so they'll report everything under the guise of invasions. So with that being said, we know what's going on. Russia's invading Ukraine. They're not going to stop there. They're going to go to Poland. They're going to go to Germany. You know what? That very well may be true. But let's think about what the objective could be here. Now, this was reported out. Secret U.S. Biolabs in Ukraine. What are they doing there? Recently, I've heard people mention that there was an interview with Bill Gates talking about his disappointment that Omicron became the actual vaccine, but warned that there was another epidemic coming. This Dmitry Alperovich posted a map of the Russian missile strikes in Ukraine targets All military airports are apparently destroyed. On the other side, it's got the locations of the biolabs in Ukraine. Notice the targets that were hit by Putin? Is this an invasion or is this a mission? And again, this is wartime 101. Just like back in the day with the mobs in New York and Chicago and St. Louis and Las Vegas. How do you attack them? You hit the funding. Everybody knows Ukraine is the hub of corruption, money laundering, and most of our politicians and their families are involved in there. And all you got to do is look at who's screaming the loudest out there with their tweets. So I find it interesting. And they're painting the picture like Ukraine is standing up to Russia. Oh, they're defeating Russia. Now Russia's backing off. Yeah, they're backing off. Putin has no interest in overtaking Ukraine. Again, think of, and we're going to start talking about Zelensky. You need to start thinking about these world leaders as mirror images of Trump's in their country. What are they all dealing with? They all deal with the same thing. They all have a deep state within their own governments, controlling everything. It's just like, everybody's complaining, Trump's not draining the swamp. He did nothing with all these people in Washington. Well, probably because this is so deep and it's worldwide. I keep saying, stop thinking about this is just all about us. This is about all the countries. This is about the world. And he was limited to what he could do. He was limited to the talent he could surround himself with. And again, I have a lot of questions for him. Don't get me wrong. I'm not in the know. I don't know all the behind the scenes stuff, but I do think when the time comes, there's going to be some questions that I think are going to need to be answered. And I'll wait and see what those answers are. So I'm going to get into these alliances. You got to think, who has Trump talked about having great relationships with? Well, Putin was one. Kim Jong-un was one. Xi was one. Zelensky was one. Now, what I find interesting about this whole thing is, where is NATO? Where is the United Nations in all this? Remember, they were formed. The purpose of their formation was because of the threat of Russia overtaking Europe. All these years, everybody's been paying billions and billions. Well, the U.S. has been paying billions and billions. What did we hear throughout the Trump presidency? Nobody pays their fair share. Now we know why. Where is everybody in all this? Oh, sanctions. You really think Russia gives a crap about these sanctions? You really think Putin cares about these sanctions? He's already made multi-billion-dollar deals with China to subsidize all this. Biden shut down all our energy resources, the Keystone Pipeline, and come to find out, Russia's number 3 on our list of places we're buying oil from. Saudi Arabia is 4. So you ask, well, what's Putin getting out of it? What's Putin getting out of all this? How is this going to be funded? Well, we're funding it. Think about the irony of that. And I do think Zelensky is working with the Orange Man and with Putin. I think this was planned long time ago. and to wait until he was out of office, because optics are everything. He cannot be involved in any of this. And why do I think Zelensky's in on this? Think about what he's asked for. He hasn't asked for. I mean, he's basically told his people, we're on our own. We're not going to get any help from NATO, but yet everybody was warning Russia, don't do it, don't do it. Well, you know what? Russia just hit them in the mouth, and they don't know what to do now. We're starting to see the cowards that everybody is. And I just want to point something out. The reason why you're not seeing any NATO troops or any U.S. troops in Ukraine, I want to go back to Syria. And I want to ask you a question. Why is Russia in Syria? And this goes back to the Obama days. Russia is in Syria because Assad, the president of Syria, asked them to come into their country, which is legal. What did we do? We sent our troops in. We invaded Syria. We were not invited there. This is what the Orange Man talked about, ending these endless wars. And of course, Obama drew his famous red line in the sand, and that was a joke. But my point is, Zelensky has not asked for troops. He's asked for aid, but he has not asked for troops. And I think that's very key in this whole thing. And that's why the deep state's not going in there, because they haven't been invited, and it would be construed as a war crime. And believe me, Putin would make them pay a heavy price. And he's already warned them about that. But I think that was a hidden double meaning, because I think Putin was actually talking to another country when he made that threat. So what is happening here is, I think they're cutting the funding. It's starting. And this is a global. We got other countries involved doing the dirty work. Deals were made. So this is my whole take on this whole thing. That don't believe everything the TV is reporting, because I don't think it's accurate. I could be wrong. My opinion. So I thought this was interesting. So the U.S. offered Zelensky a flight from the country to save his life, and he refused. He says he wants to stay to defend his country. I think he's smart enough to know if he'd have got on that flight, something would have happened. Just my opinion. They know he's turned. They know they can't control him. And now you got Putin calling for talks, and I do believe they're going to sit down and talk. And here's what I think is going to happen. And don't forget, Putin said he was going to denazify Ukraine. And I think that's a powerful statement. Because just like what we got here, you've got neo-Nazi in place in Ukraine. Again, they're foot soldiers, no different than BLM, Antifa, and the like. And what I find interesting, they have strict gun laws there. You got Zelensky arming his citizens. Is he really arming them to fight Russia, or is he arming them to fight something else? Time will tell. Now, why I think this is interesting is I think a peace deal is going to be made. I think Zelensky's going to stay in power. You may see the pipeline going back through Ukraine to get their economy. Again, this is about, my opinion, clearing out these countries and weakening the deep state's ability to do anything. You stop the funding. What happens? Because for 4 years, Peter Schweizer's put out books talking about all this corruption in all these countries and government's involvement in it and people's involvement in it all. But what happens when you get world leaders exposing stuff? Are you going to be able to spin that? What happens if they provide the evidence? Optics are very important. So again, I go back to all you got to do is look at who is speaking out the loudest. You got HRC, Lindsey Graham, Adam Schiff, Swalwell, all the Nancy Pelosi, all the people that have involvement, that are tied up. A lot of their kids are involved on some of these Ukrainian boards. Do you know that one of the biggest contributors to the Clinton Foundation were businesses located in Ukraine? You think this is all coincidence? So this next article is going to kind of try and back up my theory that world leaders are working together and everybody is totally fooled. Nobody knows who's who anymore. We all know China's controls Biden and a lot of people in our government. A lot of these people have ties. China owns a lot of land and companies in this country. So this article comes out. So Biden goes to his puppet masters and presents them with intelligence on Russia, hoping that they would step in and do something. And Xi turns around and gives the information to Putin. Now, if Xi is controlling Biden, why wouldn't he step in and do something to help? I think what we're witnessing here is the United Nations, NATO, and Biden are going to look so foolish when this is all over and done with. And I think we're witnessing the destruction. And sooner or later, I think this is going to lead to even the Democrats are going to have to realize they got to remove Biden. That this ain't working. Now, we got the State of the Union coming up on Tuesday. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets canceled. I also wouldn't be surprised if China invades Taiwan shortly before, maybe during, or shortly after the address. Time will tell. The reason, why do I say that? Well, Trump's done some interviews. He calls Putin, Xi, twin sisters. Says Taiwan's going to be next. And in a couple interviews, he had mentioned, wait till after the Olympics. Things are going to get very interesting. Now that the Olympics are over, look at your stopwatch. What happened the 2 days after the Olympics ended? Putin goes into Ukraine. I do believe, again, everything Orange Man has said, whatever, regardless of what you think of him, everything he says comes true. I have no doubt these people are working together. They're communicating together. Now, some would call that treason because, the Hatch Act, we heard that when, Trump was president and Obama was going around to world leaders. That's illegal and considered treason. But it was allowed to go on, and nobody did anything of it. Lastly, in his press conference the other day, it was funny. Brandon was asked about, have you pressured China about condemning Russia, and have you asked them for help? Brandon's response, I'm not ready to comment on that. Interesting. What was also interesting was somebody asked the question, Where's all our other non-European allies? Have you spoken to Modi in India? And he looked like a deer in headlights. Like, oh, I didn't even think of that moment. And of course said, well, we're in constant communication with the... wrong. So look what comes out. India's exploring ruby payment mechanism for trade with Russia to combat all these sanctions. Again, another big ally of Trump. In my opinion, this supports my theory that there is a global alliance, and now we have world leaders, we have countries banding together to fight a common enemy. Hey, I could be wrong. This could be the start of World War IV. And people keep talking World War III. I'm going to reiterate this one more time. World War III already happened. It happened in the 80s when Reagan administration took down Russia without firing a single shot. How did they do it? They flooded the state or the country with underground religions, and they crushed them economically with devaluing the ruble. Putin is never forgiven. He's never forgiven us for that. Keep that in mind. Again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So World War III already happened without firing a shot. That was the destruction of the Soviet Union. Now, why was that important? Do you think the deep state realized in order to proceed with their great agenda, they needed to take Russia out of the picture? And some would say, oh, Reagan would have never done that. Again, who was Reagan's vice president? Was he calling the shots? In my opinion, yes, he was. The minute... In my opinion, when Reagan got shot, that was a warning. And I think Reagan got the message, and since then, didn't step out of line. And I'm not saying Reagan wasn't a great president, but I think, like many, he was hamstringed. His hands were tied with what he could do. So that's my take on this. And look, I could be wrong. This could be leading us down the, World War IV road and, the Great Reset. And I keep saying, I'm going to say it again for all you people out there. Oh, Nasara Jasara's, they got their reset and we got ours, and ours is not going to be what theirs is. I don't care how you paint it. The Bible is very clear on this. In the end days, there will be a one world monetary system. You paint the picture all you want. How good it is. I keep saying, remember the Patriot Act. Everything starts with good intentions. Ultimately, it gets weaponized. So I'm just saying. That's my rant for today. Let me know what you think. Hopefully hit that like and subscribe buttons. Share the videos. Until next time, stay strong, stay safe, stay vigilant. Be prepared, especially now, and keep your faith and get on your knees. Because ultimately, there's only one Savior, and that's the only one that can save us from all this. Until next time, God bless everybody. Zebra 3, take us home.